I believe a big part of my journey has been intentional and not always intentional, and that would be the community building part. When I first started, I wanted to connect with people who had not just cancer, but the similar type of cancer, because, like most people, I thought all cancers are the same, which is the furthest from the truth. And the way that they're managed are all very different. Some have surgery, some have chemo, some have radiation, some have all of them, some have infusions. There's just so many different forms of treatment. And then there are a myriad of drugs that are used. And I just kind of assumed we were all kind of treated similarly. And when that became apparent to me that we were not, it was important for me to connect with people who had similar types of cancer. So in one sense, community was, for me, people who have what's called gynecological cancers, as opposed to breast cancer or prostate or lung. So that was one form of a community. And luckily in my town, we have a cancer support community, and they, on Monday evenings, every third Monday, they had a group that would meet. And so I had an opportunity to meet with newly diagnosed or people who'd been going to the group for a while. And in that particular group, there was one woman who is still here today, and she had outlived everybody else in the group by, I think she survived over 8 years of cancer, maybe 9. And then you'd see new people coming in and out. And in some instances, that was very helpful for me, because you'd learn about local doctors, you'd learn about local programs. I'd learn about how people were managing their symptoms just from people who are going through the same type of cancer. And so that was really important for me to have that type of community, but they weren't like my close friends. And then I had I don't know if I'd call them concentric circles necessarily, but if I were to take my family and friends, it's interesting how some people are very close to you, and then you have a major event happen in your life and they come even closer. And some people, when you have something who are close to you and the major event happens, they completely disappear. And learning how to understand that had nothing to do with me was very challenging, because in some instances it was very dear friends, and in some instances it was family members. And I often had to teach myself, just for preservation, that a lot of it was about them and not about me. It wasn't necessarily a rejection of me, that they weren't returning my phone calls, or they really didn't have time to talk, or they just completely blipped, disappeared off the radar, or our conversations would be very, they didn't have a lot of sustenance. There wasn't a lot of meat in the conversation. They were just kind of very surfacey. So I learned that for me to build community was also critically important around my family and friends. And Commonweal was also a really important place for me. Again, I was scheduled to go to one of the retreats, but then COVID hit and we had to wait. And then about 6 months later, they offered a program called Sanctuary, where we were able to meet remotely. And to this day, I still meet with those women. There were 6 of us. There are now 5 of us. So in terms of one of my communities of people I didn't know, they have grown to be so dear and close to me. They are my sisters, and my life is very full and important because of them. We talk everything about birth, death, cancer, children, our dreams, our fears, places we'd like to go, vacations we just took, frustration because we can't go anywhere because of COVID. Still, some of my counterparts are isolated because their immune systems are so weak. And so we are a light for each other in many ways. And yes, we share research. We all have actually very different cancers. And so it's not like we share what particular treatment. We do share symptom management, which is helpful, because chemo's and radiation, different types of cancer treatments can cause similar side effects. And so we do help each other out with symptom management. And then there's another group of, it's astounding to me, friends. When I went through chemo, it was before COVID, and they would allow guests in the room. And I was fortunate enough to be in a room that had about 8 chairs for the cancer patients. And they were very comfortable, big chairs. And then in the center, they had 6 or so chairs where guests could come sit. And I almost always had 4 guests with me. I had my mom, one of my girlfriends who I've known since I was 2, another one since I was 5, and another one since I was in high school, so around 12 or 13. And my chemos were usually about 8 hours long. I'd start with an appointment, then I'd have one infusion that went about 5.5 hours, and then my other one would go about 2.5 hours. And so it was a long day. It was a full day. And we all read different things. We were all pretty new to this process. And so they got me a backpack on wheels. They bought me an extra blanket. So when I got cold in the room, because I happened to go through my first round of chemo in the colder months. And so some days it would be 30 degrees outside. And then what took me a while to realize is the drugs are often kept in a refrigerator. And so that's something that's been in a refrigerator that's going through my port directly into my body. So you take a 98-degree temperature body and you put something that's been at 30 or 40 degrees, it chills up pretty quickly. And so that was something I hadn't prepared for, but they kind of had a sense. And of course you get heated blankets, which are fabulous when you're cold. And then I had my own blankets, and they just did a really beautiful job of making sure I was comfortable. I brought my own water, I brought my own food, and they would help me with that. They'd help me with applesauce and bone broth and really easy to digest, delicate foods that would help me during that time period. What was also so important for me to have them there is what I'd usually start out with, like a 45-minute, they'd call it the cocktail. And the cocktail would kind of prep my body and numb me and kind of start putting me to sleep. And when I would close my eyes and then I would wake up from time to time over that long duration, I would look up, and at different times I would see them on their phones sitting next to each other, or I'd see them all reading, or I'd see somebody crocheting, or I'd see 2 people talking and someone standing in the corner talking on the phone. And it was just so comforting to look up and see a loved one, and not just one, but 4 of them. And then the apex of course, was my mother. And I'm very blessed and fortunate to have her through all this, because I am the youngest in my family, and to have my mom, no matter what, heck or high water, she was going to be there, and to look out and see her. And a lot of times she'd come over and see if she could sit with me, and always want to make sure she wasn't hurting me. And she'd try and sit on the chair with me, and we'd hold each other hands. And that sense of community was forever embedded in my mind. And I know that's what partially gave me the strength and the courage to do that, was to have them there. And I also know I'm very blessed because there were people in that room that didn't have anybody. I was usually scheduled with a lot of the same women at the same time. And so we became friends, and it became joyful. They became a form of community, that we were going through similar protocols and treatments together. So I never knew where community could show up or would show up. So community can be, to me, it can be someone I see every day, where I'm very blessed, or it can be someone I see once a week or once a month, or I don't ever see, but I only hear their voice. Or if I'm fortunate enough, I can hear on Zoom and see their face on Zoom or on FaceTime, or WhatsApp, depending upon where they're calling in from in the system of preference. So I've been really blessed to have community, but to me, community is a 2-way street. I think part of the reason why I've been able to have that community is It really helps one, including myself, in ways that are immeasurable. Absolutely immeasurable. And the other part of community, without realizing it, is when I went to the rooftop for the civil courts building, the woman who conducted it and who gave us permission to go in, she is of the Jewish faith, and she said, "Do you mind if I ask my synagogue to pray for you?" And I said, "By all means, please." And so that was her community embracing me. And then today I had a practitioner who's going to do cranial sacral and lymph work with me. And he said, "Do you pray?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Do you mind if I ask my faith group to pray for you?" And I said, "Yes, please." And so I'm open to people inviting me into their communities, even though it's just in this instance, it's an energetic type invitation. So community can be in many forms and immeasurable, absolutely immeasurable. And to answer, sometimes people say, is it hard? I've noticed there are people who could start with me on my journey, and now I'm 4 years into it, and I'm on the tail end of it. And it's much harder for them to stay those 4 years. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, I've had some of my friends from grade school, high school, junior high come forward and say, "I'd really like to see you. Can I come see you?" And so I don't always understand why they've come back into my life or I've come back into their life, but I'm generally open to it. In some instances, it feels more appropriate to be distant through Zoom. And in other instances, I still mask up and they'll visit me and we'll distance from each other. Because I spend 98% of my time at home or outdoors. I don't go into public places. So I'm astounded how community can take on many forms and how I can flow in and out. So that's what community has meant for me. In terms of how to ask people for what you need, that has been an ongoing challenge. And it's interesting you say that, because that's been probably my biggest challenge in the 4 years of my diagnosis, is learning how to ask for help and learning how to ask people or explain to people what it is that I need. The most common is people want to bring you food. And because of my diet and the meds and mouth sores and symptoms and side effects, I can't always eat. And it's no offense to whatever they're making me. I either can't eat that food or I can't eat that for the 3 months I can't eat that. And all of a sudden I can start eating it again. And it's no knock on their ability to cook or what they're bringing me. It's just my ability to eat. So food is always tricky. I've learned how to say, if you're at the grocery store, you let me know, and I have a small list. I'll ask you to pick up a couple things. I've had people help me with laundry. I've had people say, "I'll do your laundry." And rather than me being stubborn and trying to go up and down the steps carrying the laundry, I'll say, "Great, if you don't mind, this is how I prefer these pieces done and these pieces done. But yeah, if you want to help me with my laundry, absolutely, I'll take help." House cleaning. I had someone gift me house cleaning. I have other friends who will come in and just help me, do bigger things like straighten out my basement or go through closets. And so things that you don't necessarily think that I would dread doing, people love doing those things. And so if there's something you're dreading doing and you say, "Do you mind helping me straighten this out?" Or "Could you help me organize this cabinet over here?" I'm astounded how people love doing that. And the things that I abhor doing, they love doing. And so maybe writing on a list of things that need to get done and then just asking. And just because you ask somebody to say, "It's really not what I like to do," that's okay. There's always another person that would step forward gleefully and do something I just hate doing. So small things, large things, organizing a bookcase. I mean, something that's been driving you nuts. Say, "Hey, would you mind coming over an hour or two and helping me with this?" those are things that took me a while to learn how to ask for. And it's really interesting. I had a dear friend recently, three of us were together, and I hadn't seen, the three of us had not been together probably, I'd been with each of them separately, but the three of us had not been together in probably over 30 years. And we were reminiscing about grade school and childhood, growing up, and how blessed we were, and the idiosyncrasies of not, running through yards and playing out till dark, and our parents never worrying where we were. And one of them said, "I've got some really tough news. My brother-in-law was just diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he's been married to my sister for over, I think, 35, 40 years. And he said they're going to be losing their best friends for life. And it's really hard." And he was deeply moved and upset. And I'd actually never seen him tear up like that. And I said to him, "I want you to hear me." And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "And you need you to look at me." And he said, "Okay, I'm looking at you." And I said, "You need to learn how to ask for help. And you need to learn how to accept help." And one of my other friends coughed and was like, "Ha, ha." I'm like, I was the worst at it. So it's a gift to allow others to help you, help me. It soothes and helps them feel like they're contributing. It triggers something for them that is inexplainable, that doesn't need to have an explanation. But being able to ask for help, and it's okay if people say no. Yeah, because you never know when they're going to say yes. And if they're asking, it usually means they want to do something to help you. So please, please, and be realistic about how you're asking for help. Don't go cuckoo crazy unless it's a really, really close friend or family member. But me learning how to accept someone helping me with my laundry was a big step. But I got there. I definitely got there.